I think.
that we heard today.
Yeah. Appropriate. Just- Right. Good evening and welcome to the Roseville Joint Union High School District Board of Trustees meeting. I call this meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. Barbara, will you please take the roll?
Here. Here.
Here. Here. All board members are present and accounted for tonight. So Landon, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight? Okay, once again, announcement of meeting protocols. There is an opportunity to speak to the Board of Trustees on items not on the agenda during the public comment, item 3.5, and an opportunity to speak to items on the agenda when that item comes up for consideration. Please complete the speaker form located in the back of the room, and we'll call on you when it's your turn to speak. If 1 to 9 members of the public wish to speak on an agenda or non-agenda item, the timeline will be three minutes. If 10 or more wish to speak, the timeline will be 90 seconds. Report of action from closed session. We had item 2.1 in closed session on a motion of Board Member Huber, second by Board Member Hirota. The Board of Education voted to approve a special education settlement agreement. And then closed session item 2.2, no action taken. Communication, any communications, Superintendent Becker? Okay, the only communication I have is that the Placer County Office of Education has completed the review of the district's fiscal year 21-22 board adopted LCAP and budget. Based on the data provided to our office, the district's LCAP and budget for fiscal year 21-22 has been approved. So thank you all for the work on that. Item 3.5 is public comment for items not on the agenda. Again, please fill out a speaker card in the back and we'll call you up. If you could tell us your name, if you're a community member, parent of the district, employee of the district, we'd appreciate it. Charlie Vanderveen.
Hi, my name is Charlie Vanderveen. I'm a student at Granite Bay High School, and I'm here today to share my experience taking the Ethnic Studies course. The basis of the class is learning about different cultures and our differences and similarities as people. My friend and I who chose to take the class learned more than we expected about ourselves and our peers. We took the course as an elective because we wanted to learn about diverse history. Our district should keep it open as a class because students should be free to make their own decisions surrounding their own educations. I was at the last school board meetings where many people voiced their concerns about the class material. I've commonly heard that the class is causing segregation, tribalization, and dehumanization. These words have power in them and they easily concern people, especially when they are misdefined and misused. Respectively, their definitions are enforced division between groups, unification on a tribal basis, and depriving a person or group of people of human qualities. As someone who has taken this course before and knows several people presently taking the class, I can safely say that the course causes none of these. We learn about each other in this class. We celebrate how different people have existed before us and how different parts of society have grown to form what we have today. We are brought together as a group of humans while still acknowledging our differences and individuality. I've also heard your concerns about various forms of government. There seem to be plenty of complaints that the curriculum is communist or Marxist. I've read the textbook and I've listened to the lectures and I've completed all of the projects. Not once were we taught this. We learned about different governments in the context of this group in history had this type of government and their society looked like this. The instructor did not teach us that any governments were better or worse than others. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Charlie. Leslie Jameson? Followed by Joel Manfredi.
Hi, my name's Leslie Jameson. I have 4 kids, and I appreciate Charlie's comments. I am a Sacramento chapter leader for an organization called FAIR. It's the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I talked about it a couple weeks ago. And I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding. I think we all want to have something that has human decency. FAIR has an ethnic studies program that they've come out with. And it's interesting because like what Charlie says, it sounds similar. You know, we want human decency. We want to learn about different cultures. We want to understand each other. But I have looked closely at both curriculums. I've looked at the California curriculum that is being widely adopted, and I've compared it to the FAIR curriculum. And there's a marked difference. Unlike the ethnic studies curriculum being adopted throughout California, FAIR developed its curriculum to empower students to confront racism and bigotry without a dehumanizing emphasis on racial difference. There's so much pointed out in the California ethnic studies about racial difference and just a negative tone to it. In contrast to the curricula that view America through a triumphal or cynical lens, FAIR presents an honest account of the past and present, teaching students to think for themselves by engaging deeply with original sources, multiple perspectives, and opposing viewpoints on important events. It's balanced and effective. The curriculum emphasizes the dignity and worth of each person because of our common humanity. When Dr. Clarence Jones, a speechwriter and advisor to MLK, was made aware of California's ethnic studies model curriculum and studied it, he said, "I have great dismay and great concern for the perversion of history that is being perpetuated by the California ethnic studies model curriculum. If this model curriculum is approved, it will inflict great harm on millions of students in our state." I strongly agree that the California ethnic studies curriculum that is passed and is now required for graduation will erode much of the civil rights progress we have made over the last 60 years. I am grateful to be a part of the FAIR organization. It provides a compelling alternative and better, more effective way to reach our civil rights ideals. As a school board and superintendents, it is your job to represent your constituents. The FAIR curriculum reaches more of those people, the 70 to 80% of people sitting in the middle who just want to move forward with humanity and hopeful optimism for the future. There may be people at each end of the side of the spectrum who are not satisfied with this approach, and that's okay. I implore you as a board and leaders of this district to learn more about FAIR. It is a national organization advised by an impressive and well-recognized and diverse board of advisors. They can provide robust training to educators and parents and much more. I have some cards and other information that I can leave at the desk at the exit table, but I encourage you to look into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Joel Manfredi, followed by Chris Stevens.
I didn't prepare for 3 minutes. I prepared for 90 seconds, so I got all kinds of time. I'm Joel Manfredi. I'm an English teacher here at Wood Creek High School. Again, I love teaching here. I am here to formally request that this district adopt a spit test option for the mandatory testing of the unvaccinated employees that will start on October 15th. It was confirmed today that the test we will be using now is a nasal swab that has ethylene oxide as its method of sterilization. Ethylene oxide is used in chemicals including antifreeze and pesticides, and according to the EPA, is associated with multiple types of cancers, including lymphoma, leukemia, stomach cancer, breast cancer, increased tumors of the brain, lung, connective tissue, uterus, and mammary glands, and is considered a carcinogen to humans if inhaled. But don't worry, the company that's providing our test put out a statement to make us feel better. They said, quote, "The most recent concerns are brought on by social media. Such social media has communicated false claims regarding COVID testing. where it has incorrectly associated the risk of long-term ethylene oxide exposure to single-use, short-term devices such as swabs. As much as I would like to believe them, and I don't feel any better, I'd like to look at what the NIH says about ethylene oxide. It says, in quote, risk of mortality from all lymphatic and hematopoietic cancer increased with increasing cumulative exposure to ethylene oxide. Increasing cumulative exposure to ethylene oxide was associated with increased risk of leukemia. The NIH is not a social media company. The EPA is not a social media company. And as much as some media companies would like me to, quote, stop doing my own research, I feel it's best for me and my family to find out if I will need to take a cancer stick up my nose once a week to keep my job. Western Placer is using a spit test. Del Oro Athletics is using a spit test. Spit tests are available from the company that we are using. This is something the board can push for in order to assist those teachers who don't want to be dosed with a carcinogen every week until the jab mandate comes, which it will. Right now in our district, there are 32 teachers who do not want to take a weekly test, and I think a spit test option would be a nice gesture for them. Please help us. Mr. Huber, you told me in my first meeting here that you are not my only recourse. You are. I've reached out to every other available recourse that I have. We are getting no help. So please, if you would consider this, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you. Chris
Not helping.
Stevens, your next one. Followed by Cassandra Stevens.
How you doing? My name's Chris Stevens. I have a child in the district. And just this past Tuesday, she was removed from class for not wearing a mask. Right out into the hall, talked to the teacher. Teacher says, why aren't you wearing your mask? She says, why do I have to wear a mask? Because I've already had COVID on record at the school at their test and already had the vaccination. Teacher says, well, because it's the law. The law is what she tells my daughter. Luckily, my daughter's very smart. She says, no, it's a mandate, not a law. Oh, is her reply. The teacher. So, well, if you don't wear your mask, you're gonna have to go to continuation school. Okay, set it up. Call my parents right now. No, we don't want to do that right now. Why not? Scare tactic. That's what this is. Teachers teach, don't be police. There's the police right there. Call him if you need to remove my daughter. Have them teach. That's what they're paid for. The mask, Costco, okay? Right here. These masks do not eliminate the risk of contact any disease or infection, nor reduce the risk of illness or death. Anybody want to look at the box? Costco. It's full. I don't use them. We have them for looks. Looks cool. I like yours. It's cool. So, on you guys' flyer, the Joint Unified School District prohibits discrimination, intimidation, harassment, ethnicity. I'm Asian. Association with a group. I think her group is a group that is vaccinated, has had COVID, didn't die, and is still there and still has to wear a mask, but she doesn't want to. She's part of a group that doesn't want to wear a mask. There's a lot of people here. Looking to your crowd here, it looks pretty good not wearing a mask. So my question is, do I need to contact RJUHSD, Executive Director, Human Resources, to file a complaint about this teacher harassing my child? Does that fit the qualifications? Or I will be denied, saying it's not important. Your child's not important, but she got straight A's. And she'll go to continuation school? The people that don't wear the mask look good. The people that wear the mask looks like they're hiding something. Lying. And you have to wear a mask, you're lying for something. What's the lie? Money? I know the upper school board has to control you some way. Comply, comply, comply for the money. Money's only good on this planet. Once you leave this planet, money, you don't have a penny to spend. Nothing. And then when all this goes bad, who they coming after? If you're still alive.
Thank you, Chris. Your time's up. Andrew Stevens, followed by Karen Combest.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Stevens, and I have a student here at Wood Creek High School. I actually wanted to speak tonight about a topic at the last meeting. You guys had Independence High School here talking about how wonderful they were. And my job here is I like to tell people that I'm helping people get into homeschool because we all know that the vaccine mandate is coming. And I'm here to save y'all. Just reach out to me. And one thing, if you guys were here last week or if you watched, they mentioned that you could do two options. One was online, or one was where you would be on campus 2 days a week. The rest was online. And I just want to remind you all that if you guys choose the option to do independence because you want to avoid the vaccine, if your kids are on campus 2 days a week, you still have to get it. And another thing, a lot of people were really excited about the dual enrollment with Independence High School, and I wanted to let you know that through homeschool, you can also take the A to G accredited courses, and you can do dual enrollment with homeschool, and you can get college scholarships also through homeschool. So for those of you who are thinking that independent study might be your out, I'm letting you know now. If you choose that option, just know that your kids might still have to get the vaccine, and you can excel just as much with homeschool. That's it.
Thank you. Karen Combest. Next up will be Robert Brecky.
Good evening. My name is Karen Combest, and I have a daughter at Oakmont High School. Go Vikes. And I realized last night that she has been wearing a mask longer at high school than she has not wearing a mask at high school. And that made me really sad and rather mad, actually. And there's no off-ramp. There's no end in sight. Per the CDC, per the CDPH, there's no criteria by which that ends for them. So I think we'll probably be here next year and the year after, and she'll probably graduate in one, which is unfortunate. So I will give the COVID update since that's not on the agenda. And I would like to say that Roseville Joint's current positivity rate is 0.2%, 26 total currently, 6 of those are staff. 149 modified quarantine, 32 on full. No stats on testing because that's not on the dashboard. But the big news is that the Let Them Breathe lawsuit has a date, and it is September 30th. So the court date is September 30th. That's a big day. Not super optimistic, but I have a little hope. Bad news is that today Dr. Galley said that the CDPH is considering vaccine mandates, which pretty much means it's a done deal because Los Angeles is doing it, and what they do first is the way we go. I will say that I dropped my son off at UCLA, and they have spit tests in the vending machines. They also have birth control in the vending machines, but they have spit tests. And if it's easy enough to get it on campus at UCLA, it should be easy enough to get it here. My next topic is in regards to a health class here, and we've had some emails, so I appreciate the response, the quick response. There's a new curriculum, a supplemental curriculum in the global, it's called Global Citizens, Roseville Joint, and I guess I'll publicly just say that based on the email exchanges today, I would fully expect that that curriculum is removed from every Google Classroom of every freshman student that has health right now, and we will be asking parents to confirm that. If parents, the last thing I would like to say, if you are not in your student's Google Classroom, get in there. Get access. I never used to even look. Now I look every few days to see what is going on, to see what materials they're looking at, to see what new stuff is coming down, because apparently supplemental stuff is not necessarily going through the official approval process. So find out your kid's Google Classroom login and stay engaged and ask them questions about what's happening. That's the only way that we're going to know, truly. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Robert Brecky.
My name is Robert Brecky. I'm with Stop Radical Education. And I do have a child, a grandchild in first grade over in West Park. I have no idea what school. Anyway, I'm up here because I received a phone call a couple of weeks ago from a, quote, journalist telling me that I had instigated a death threat letter to a teacher at one of the schools in this district, and that I'm a Proud Boy. I didn't even know the Proud Boys existed in Placer County, and I really don't care. If they were the ones who were disrupting here, they should calm down, okay? But he asked me to denounce them. I don't denounce them unless they're going to burn, riot, loot, and murder. And I was told him I'm glad that Black Lives Matter and Antifa weren't here that night, because we'd probably be calling the fire department. But I don't like the accusations, and if there was a death threat made, isn't the district or the schools required to make a police report? If a teacher received a death threat 2 weeks ago, and I'm the one who supposedly instigated it, why haven't the police called me? So I'm assuming it was just a total lie. Then this week, 2 days ago, I had a journalist who actually gets paid to be a journalist from the Sacramento Bee call me and tell me that you folks, the Roseville Joint Union High School District, requested that I remove a video where I highlighted actually 4 or 5 of your teachers disobeying the rules of the state education code and your own district code, and that you had asked me to remove that, and I refused. So whoever it was here that contact me again, okay? Because I rather doubt it if that happened. And I don't know why. I mean, I know the video is rather alarming. I know that. And it should be to the parents to see what's going on in your classroom and what your kids are having to be taught and brainwashed. And it's openly done. I mean, the teachers were giddy. They were happy. You know, we're doing this, we're doing that. We're pushing against the patriarchy in here every day. Yay, yippee. And the dominant culture. Okay? Parents need to know that. So even if you ask me to remove the video, I'm not going to, because there's nothing wrong with it. It's just revealing what's going on in the classrooms. I ranted a bit here. I had a lot more, but I'm going to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Wixon.
Thank you. My name is Mike Wixon. So I'm here tonight again to talk about ethnic studies classes. And I'll just start by saying, if you were to adopt what Leslie was offering, you would never see me here again. I would go away, happy, very happy. But you heard me at the last meeting talk about the district and teaching classes that are in violation of the state code, education code, as well as the way it's being taught is potentially, I think it's a violation of civil rights. And I think it's a violation also of the Constitution. And I'm very serious about that. I'm not just saying that, I'm really very serious. You also heard a gentleman come up here earlier and kind of mention it's similar tactics, similar teaching, similar ways that this is happening throughout the district. And I think this is just a class where it shows itself a little bit easier. So you also heard me talk about the materials being racist, discriminatory. I mentioned Marxist last time. The truth is, it's neo-Marxist. So to Charlie, I apologize, it's not Marxist, but you do have Marxist people in the curriculum, and they're clearly Marxist. And I mentioned that last time, Angela Davis being one. She admits she's a Marxist. You also have a group out there that's an international socialist group that considers this to be Marxist material. And you think, it's kind of strange to me to hear of a socialist group that's international thinking the California curriculum is Marxist. I mean, and that it's highly politically motivated, that it does violate civil rights, and it's a problem. So I thought that was odd, but I guess politics makes strange bedfellows. So, I've asked the board to take some reasonable action that at least at this point, knowing that it's in violation, knowing that you're not in current compliance with the code for the curriculum, please just ask your parent or teachers to notify the parents of everything that's being taught to them on the daily curriculum. They're already collecting it. Teachers have to compile that. It is in their classroom. It's required by your board policy. It has to happen right now, regardless of me being here or not. They're doing that. Just ask them to post it on the Google Docs so that parents can know what their kids are being taught. So my last question is, I asked that of you last time. You also, I wanted to mention one other thing. Got a few seconds. There was a gal here from Vietnam who also mentioned this is what Marxism, communism looks like. She lived it. I haven't, fortunately. Anyway, I'm just asking you one question. Have you asked your superintendent to direct your teachers to do that? And I would
your time is
respectfully
up,
request that you do that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to move the information matters after the consent agenda unless a board member has an issue with that. Okay. Yep. We'll just move information matters past the consent agenda. All right, so we'll move on to the consent agenda, and on the consent agenda are listed under consent. All items listed under the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion with a one roll call vote. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless the Board of Trustees, audience, or staff requests specific items to be removed from the consent agenda for separate action. Any item removed will be considered after the motion to approve the consent agenda. Are there any consent items the board would like to remove?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'd like to pull 5.5.
Okay. 5.5.
Mine was the same with just a additional request, which I think you sort of alluded to, is that we hear 4.2 immediately before 5.5 off the consent agenda because they tie into each other, and I don't think we need to have the discussion at two separate times.
Absolutely.
I have a question to that then. Does that, because we skipped over committee reports
Oh,
at
I forgot.
3.6?
I'm sorry, I did.
Would
forget.
that be, is that the only committee
No,
report? that would come from?
that's my mistake. Do we have we should do 3.6. You backtrack for just a second. Do we
Sorry.
have any committee reports?
My committee report was that it's related to federal program monitoring
All right,
and
then we'll-
5.5, so we could.
Then
maybe
let's
get-
move committee reports. Good call. Either before or after information matters. What do you prefer, before or after 4.2?
Well, the only information matter is 4.2,
No, but
so.
committee reports, do you want that before or just after?
so
Or
my-
should we move committee reports off since it's tied to?
Yeah, the committee report is, there's no report other than
Okay.
4.2 and 5.5.
Perfect. Okay, I will also open it up to the public. Are there any items that you wish to be pulled from the consent agenda? 5.5 is already being pulled. Sure. Will be for discussion.
We're gonna
for an
talk
action
about it
item.
later.
We will have a discussion item on that under our action items. All right?
Yeah, we'll
It's
talk
placed
about
on the
that
action
separately.
item.
We're
It'll
gonna,
be-
we're gonna talk about
Okay,
that
we
one
got it.
separately.
We got it. Okay, consent agenda. Do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
Motion to pass the consent agenda with the exception of 5.5.
Okay, do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Constant, a second by Ms. Huber. Barbara, will you take the roll?
Yes, P. Constant,
Yes.
Heidi Hall,
Yes.
Julie Hirota. Yes. Scott Huber,
Yes.
and Andrew Tay.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. That was a second by Ms. Hirota. We'll move on to information matters. There is no RSEA report tonight, so that will be removed as well. Ms. Fork was unable to make it tonight, so we will go into 4.2 Federal Program Monitoring Update with Dr. Moore.
Thank you, President Tag, Board. This is an update, and as you've mentioned already, this is related to the board policy item that has been moved to action matters. And we'll just wait just a moment to get the presentation slides loaded. So federal program monitoring happens for districts that receive federal funds. This is a regular course of events. And I wanted to share with you a couple details as why we have been selected. So school districts, any school district that receives funds is eligible to be selected. A certain number per county per region are selected every 2 to 4 years. Many districts have a 4-year cycle. We have been lucky enough to have a 2-year cycle, and I say that tongue in cheek. We are selected for a variety of reasons. We are one of the larger districts getting a large amount of federal funds, but we also have not had clean findings for the past few visits. And so when we are audited, it's a federally required audit that is done by the state of California. So state employees help to audit based on the federal guidelines. And they come and they'll either come in person or virtually. And every 2 years we can be selected. And so we have been in this cycle of audits every 2 years for a while. And it is fairly extensive. So our goal is to be as proactive as possible, get the systems in place, make sure we're doing everything right and audit proof, and get back to the work of educating our students. But we do need to have some of these things in place. So that's a little bit of the why that we're selected. So this time around, they'll be coming in November. They have asked a deadline of the evidence to be uploaded by October 1st. So that gives them a month to review our evidence, and then they come and do the audit over a series of about 4 days, the very first week of November that is scheduled. And so you can see we have a long list of areas that we have been selected for audit. And it is fairly extensive in each of these areas, the evidence that we're providing for how we have everything from policy to staff training to practices and proof that it's being implemented appropriately. As in addition to our district-wide audit areas, our school sites are identified in each of these areas as well. And so each of these schools that you see on the list are having a high level of involvement in helping to gather the data, make sure that our practices are appropriate and complete. And I'd like to point your attention to that very last bullet, is that all of our comp sites are currently under review, and this is from 2 years ago audit, the PE waiver, and this has to do with the way we do our 4x4 schedule. Because our students aren't in PE all year long, they might be in the class one semester or the other. They still get a year's worth of credit, but because of the way the law is written as if we were traditional year-long classes, we need to get a waiver approved. Now, the team has been working on that. We did get the waiver cleared through our auditor. It has not yet gone to the state for one school. We were focusing on one school to get it started, make sure we figured it out. And now the team is doing that with all of the other schools. But again, this is very intensive work. We have to make sure that it's clean, clear, and appropriate. There's a lot of back and forth with our auditors. Once we get that, the rest of the schools done, because they each have their own bell schedule nuances, a few different things we're working with their departments, then we will get all of our comprehensive high schools sent to the state board for approval, and then we should be clean on that point. So a lot of details, What we just wanted to give you all of that as a perspective, because the board policies that we're bringing to you this evening are specifically required for update with our federal program monitoring. So they look for specific language that they want to see. We need to update some of our policies. And you can see on this slide, we have a variety, I think it's 7 different categories of policies. Some of them as simple as updating the names. If we had a different staff member who's now over complaints, we're going to update the names, and those have to be posted everywhere. And others a little bit more significant, and we're just trying to do our due diligence. So I understand there may be some discussion around there, but we just wanted to share with you that background as far as the why these are not language or things that we have subjectively selected. We're going by the guidance that we've been given.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moore. Any questions on that in particular? Okay, then we will go to item, thank you, to item 5.5, which is approving new updated board bylaws, policies, and administrative regulations. We did have a committee report that Mr. Constant sits on, and I think Mr. Huber also wanted to speak to this. So, Mr. Constant, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks. I thought it was better for us to not give the committee report earlier because the committee spoke with staff on all of these issues. There were a number of these policies where we had questions on why language was the way it was presented. I know I particularly want to have a deeper discussion on AR 1250 after we hear from staff on these. My understanding, based on our committee discussion, and I just would like this to be confirmed before we move on to talking about the individual policies, was that each of these ARs and BPs were amended in the way they were specifically to meet the requirements of the federal program monitoring review. And because of the informed by the experiences we've had from previous reviews and audits, and that the goal was to get through with a clean review based on this language. Now, that being said, I do have some concerns on the differences between the CSBA language, the State Board of Education language, the language in the education code. I'll repeat what I've said before. I think it's completely ludicrous that school boards have to make policies that say we follow the state laws instead of just the state laws applying. And I think it's a redundant activity that government is so good at being redundant. But I understand, and I just want staff to speak a little bit to why the language is the way the language is, what the purpose is, and how that fits in specifically to what we just heard in item 4.2. And then when we get down to individual policies, I'd like to come back and give a few comments on AR 1250. So with that, I'll kind of pass it over to staff, if that's okay with you.
Would you like to answer that, Dr. Moore?
So you would like us to speak in general or specifically to each item? Just want to clarify.
I think in general to start, and I know based on the fact that I already have 2 policies sitting in front of me that one of my colleagues would want to probably discuss those in specifics, and then I'll have specifics on 1250. But I think along the lines of share with everybody what you shared with the committee on why the language is as precise as it is, and what are the ramifications or implications, I guess you say. What would be the implications if we are making changes? I kind of a little bit feel like we're back in the corner, but I want to hear it again so that we can have discussion at the board level.
Certainly, and I'm looking also to Mr. Hasty and Dr. Dobson, who have been point on these particular policies, to jump in if there's anything further. But in general, here's how it goes with our FPM audit. We have gone specifically to the U.S. Attorney General for the language that we've used and the California Department of Education. And in the case of FPM, the CDE and U.S. Attorney General language trumps what we would typically use for our policies, which is gamut from our California School Boards Association. That would be our typical go-to for our source of data. In some cases, we've done both. So, for example, and it's in front of you here, one of them was the hate-motivated behavior. And so in that case, because it had been since 2015 that we had updated anything at all, we had actually merged a few where Gamut had some recommended updates and the U.S. Attorney General had specific language. And I think we're going to talk about it more specifically shortly, but there was some question, and that was California School Board's language that was in question. So in the version we have printed for you, that we removed it because that wasn't required by FPM. So we've left in there the required language by FPM. In addition, all the Gamut CSBA policies will have resources at the end of the document. Materials or links, those are all optional. None of those would be required. I know in previous board meetings, our board has asked us to be consistent and to put those in, but none of that would have any ramifications. It's completely our choice if we included them. Now, if we take out any language that's required by the U.S. Attorney General, the ramifications would be that, well, we do have another board policy committee coming up. We could take it there. We could bring it back to our October 14th meeting. So what that would mean is they've asked us to upload everything by October 1st. But October 1st is not a hard deadline. It's the recommended deadline. The true hard deadline is November 1st, because that's when the virtual review it takes place, is that week of November 1st. If we did not have the board policy approved by then, the ramification would be a finding. And the finding comes with various consequences and letters and plans and more documents that we have to write. And ultimately, we're still going to have to pass the policy because they're going to need it to clear the finding. And it just adds those extra hoops and time and energy to talk through the why and the wherefore and the how we're going to fix it. Because the true fix is having a policy that has the language that they are expecting us to have. So there's some wiggle room, and that's where I'll defer to Dr. Dobson and Mr. Hasty for the specific policies and the language, if there was anything that was a wiggle room. But having a policy with the language, the gist of it is required to the point where we have to highlight the language to show them the specific language and then upload it. And if we don't have it, or if we don't get it quite right, that's when we'll get the finding and the fix. And so we've just tried to be verbatim from what their guidance documents to avoid any of those findings. Does that answer sufficiently?
Yeah, I just wanted to have a foundation for this discussion and questions.
Our last meeting, I think it was the last meeting, I had asked that when we do the board policy review, that the documents that come before us with amendments to them, if the changes based on FPM versus CSBA versus Gamut could be highlighted. So in these policies that came to us today, how would I know that?
So Mr. Hasty, do you want to speak to your policies, and then we'll have Dr. Dobson follow with the others?
Yeah, thank you. The information that you have in front of you is not done in that format. The format that we've been using is anything that we're removing from the policy, we're removing out of there. And so we don't have, in the policies that I have, which are the sexual harassment, non-discrimination, uniform complaint, those policies are just strictly, this language is out based on what we're getting from CDE through the FPM program. And this language is what's in all of the board policies that I have. So non-discrimination, sexual harassment, Title IX. The only changes in there is John Becker's name to my name. So that's the only information you're seeing there. And we're legally mandated to make sure that the Title IX coordinator and the equity compliance officer is accurately listed, name, address, email, phone, all that kind of stuff. So that's the only change there. The uniform complaint process is just some wording, making sure that we've got all of the information in there about how we do our investigations, what kind of appeals processes there are, all the way up to appeals that would happen at through the Office of Civil Rights, and anything that would happen that would happen at the board level or a level above the site appeal process, or the district appeal process, excuse me.
clarify and directly address your question. The way the meetings fell, the staff work and the agenda for this meeting had been completed before the request. So we're a little bit out of sync. So that will be our regular operating procedure going forward. If you remember last meeting, I said we had already had a meeting, but we weren't prepared to give a report yet because of the Brown Act stuff. So we will be getting there. We just didn't have the opportunity to do it because of the leapfrog timing that we had on these issues.
Any other discussion on procedure, or do we want to look at specific AR BPs that we want to look at? Mr. Huber, did you want to?
Sure. Are you ready for specifics?
Specific, sure.
Okay. So I read through all these policies, and there's a couple of them that I think several can go through without any issue. Several, I think, two of them in my mind, two of them need to be modified, which is partly what you have in front of you, and then two of them I'd like to pull and work on the language some more. But so let me go through them. But I won't go through the policies that I think can just go through because I think that's, fine. Policy 5111 on admission. No. Yes, on admission. I didn't have any real issues with it, except at the very end, you'll notice it says management resources. And while it's not really a big deal on this one doesn't have very many management resources. It was put up sort of as a convenience for, I think, staff, and I agree with the thought process behind it. But I think we ought to keep the management resources off book, off the policy. And the reason why is, I'm just going to pick one out here. The management resources, U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights Publications, Dear Colleague Letter, May 6th of 2011. If we adopt this policy with that listed, if the U.S. Department of Education in the Office for Civil Rights Publications, if they change that letter, then we have to go back and change our policy. So rather than do that, I think the management resources ought to be just removed and keep those separately so that staff can, if they need to go look at them, great, they can look at them. If they get updated, that's fine. So on Board Policy 5111 for admission, the revisions that are here on the table where they've deleted the management resources at the end, I'm fine with it. I'm open to hear what my colleagues think, but on that one, again, just delete the management resources, and then I think it's good to go.
Process. Barbara, with them hosted on Gamut now, will they allow us to do that with those? Now that we're doing it differently through?
They have to allow us to make revisions to them.
No, we're making revisions, but I noticed in Gamut, these are all live links. They're not just on our website anymore. We're moving them from our website to Gamut. I'm just wondering if we're okay to do that, if we're allowed to do that. Because the links go live when they're on Gamut. So that's why I get what you're saying. I just want to make sure we can do it. I don't know if they'll override that part on Gamut. That was just procedural. We can look into that.
I haven't looked at the training yet.
Yeah, well, we'll look into it. I just wanted to make sure.
Sure.
Understanding and looking at the Gamut templates now versus previously, as it says that these aren't actually part of the policy. And I believe that they automatically update those resources because Gamut does not perceive that to be part of the policy, is what their templates say now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if that's true, then let's remove them. Again, my opinion, I think management resources, get rid of them. Again, important for you guys to keep them, so you can refer to them when you need to. But from a policy perspective, I think keep them off policy.
On that, Scott?
Sure.
So I'm looking on board docs at the one that came with our packet, and it shows that as being stricken, as well as the one that was handed to us. So am I missing something? On the one that's on board docs, page 3 of 3, the very last line shows the Dear Colleague letter being stricken. And I thought that's what you mentioned striking.
Version I downloaded.
Which the version that's on our table is different than the one that's in board docs. If I'm looking at board policy 5111, the one that's on our table has 3 pages, and the one that's in board docs has 4, and at the bottom of page 3 on board docs, it shows that exact item being stricken. Was there something else you were concerned about, or is it that?
No, that was it. So the version that I downloaded last night, I think, had additional management resources that are not in this 5111 that's here.
Why isn't this?
They're missing. This
Yeah.
batch, it looked like they just got deleted.
I don't know where this one came from, but the one on board docs is the one we're voting on, the accurate, right?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So it's stricken on board docs. Right.
So I believe that Mr. Huber is suggesting that all the management resources be stricken, and
Well-
those are still there. Is that correct?
We can only deal with the policies that are in front of us, right? So
No,
On,
not-
on board docs is what I'm
Yeah.
referring to.
all the management resources on board docs, strike them all. And the one that's on board docs, and this is another one. One of my frustrations is, and this is why I think it's dangerous when you plug in websites, because website addresses change, right? Sometimes links will get broken. If you look at the board policy 5111 that's on board docs, just above management resources, 3 lines above, it says Code of Regulations, Title 17, Section 6000 to 6075, then it has a link to it. When you click on that link, you only get Section 6000. This is why their links are 5111 online. It's not
Page.
Yeah, it's not here. Right, it's not on the printed version that's here. So that's why I think the websites, fine having the links to the it's fine listing the regulations, the codes themselves. I mean, if I type in Google, Code of Regulations, Title 17, 6000 to 6075, it takes me right to it. So I think there's little
think-
value in having the website.
Yeah, I think what's different though, when you go to that link at the bottom, there's a click to go through each section. So, part of what we're doing is if we continue on moving to board doc, or to Gamut, is they manage those links to keep them up to date versus us having to do that.
Yeah, I'm suggesting don't put any links in. I think it's irrelevant. But that's my own personal opinion. The management resources, I think, delete them. Anyway, that's 5111. The next one I want to talk about is Board Policy 1312.3, Uniform Complaint. And there's not a copy of it here, but that's a similar one. At the very end, it has 4 or 5 websites. And I just think there's minimal value in actually having the websites listed, but that's just my opinion. I'm happy to have, my colleagues differ. This one did not have any management resources, so that one was fine. But so on 1312.3, my only recommendation would be just delete the websites that are there. But again, I'm happy to, my colleagues disagree on that one. And then BP 1312.3. And then board policy, I'll deal with this one because I think this one is shorter to deal with. Board policy 5145.9 on hate motivated behavior. What was placed in front of us is revised from what's online. Having said that, I would still like to go through it with a little more fine-tooth comb and work on this a little bit more. Some of this language is necessarily going to be required by the feds, but I think some of it is not. And if we've got the time, I'd like to go through and work on that with staff, to revise it and bring it back to and then let the policy committee deal with it after that, if that's okay.
Highlighted on what the FPM required language is, highlighted as separate from what any additional changes have been. In addition to the FPM required language to bring it up to the audit compliance, and then anything that's additional to that may be highlighted a little different.
So on this one, I'm requesting that we pull it, and then if the board's okay with me working on it with staff, and then it'll come back to the policy committee.
What did the policy committee?
I won't speak for the committee because we didn't discuss it in this, but I'll say personally, 2 comments. One, devil's advocate, I believe we should have all the links at the bottom because I'm one of those people that goes and clicks them all, reads them all. That was one of my main reasons for pushing us to go to Gamut is when I went to other districts' websites, I could see the policy and then go find all the supporting material and kind of piece together why it was the way it was, and I couldn't do that with ours, and it would drive me crazy. So I found myself going to our board policies to read them, and then going to another school district's site so I could use their links instead of having to Google everything. So that's my personal opinion there. As far as 5145.9, I have no problem having it looked at, the same questions we were asking. What do we require to have for the federal program monitoring versus what is supplemental? My understanding from our policy committee was we pretty much had to have what's here. But if there's some wiggle room and there's some input, I would definitely like to have us have that discussion. And then when we're done with those, I still have the one policy I want to talk to.
Policy?
Yeah, I got one more. And this will demonstrate exactly why I think the links ought to be removed. AR 1250 on visitors and outsiders. This one I want to go through a little bit more in more detail, and the reason why. So it says no outsider, but then it's not defined right there, right? At the end of that first sentence under registration procedure, at the end of the first sentence, it has parentheses, Education Code 627.1, subdivision A, 627.2, and then PC 627.3. PC means penal code. There is no Education Code 627.1, and there is no Education Code 627.2. Now, this comes straight from either Gamut or CDE or the feds. I don't know which entity did it, but it's just dead wrong. Those links do not exist. Those statutes don't exist. When you look at the intent, and I'm very familiar, and I by the way, outsider, and we switch back and forth between the term visitor and outsider, right? Neither of which is defined. But outsider is defined in Penal Code 627.1. It only took me a couple minutes to realize instead of Education Code, they should have wrote Penal Code, right? Okay, so when you go to Penal Code 627.1, it defines what an outsider is specifically. And this is my own 2 cents. The proposed policy says, which would include immigration enforcement officers. Well, under the Penal Code definition, they're already included under the definition. So, I mean, it would be like saying, which would also include Martians. Well, I don't think we need to include extraneous stuff that's already defined in the definition of outsiders. But be that as it may, I know the former Attorney General of California, Javier Becerra, felt very strongly about this. Not that I really particularly care what he feels strongly about, but that's why this language is there. Let's be honest about it. But here's my problem with it. It says, no outsider shall enter or remain on school grounds of the Roseville Joint Union High School District during school hours without having registered with the principal or designee. Okay, fine. Now, if you read the next sentence, if there are no exigent circumstances necessitating immediate action, and if the immigration officer does not possess a judicial warrant or court order that provides a basis for the visit, the officer and any visitor must provide the following information to the principal or designee. So what it says is, I'm going to use my words, the first part, if you go register at the office and they find you have a valid reason, great, you get to go on campus. If not, you give them these 5 things and you get to go on campus. Now that's absurd. And the reason why it's absurd is this policy doesn't allow for us to prevent anyone from going on campus. Outsiders are welcome as long as you provide those 5 things. It's poorly drafted and poorly written from either Gamut or the CDE or the feds or whoever gave it to us. It's just poorly written. Ironically, the next beef I have is those 5 items that are there, name, address, age, purpose, framing the school, proof of identity. Again, at the end of number 5, it says EC 627.3. It's not the education code. That education code provision doesn't exist. It's the penal code. But ironically, when you look at the wording that's stricken, the wording that's stricken just below that is an exact quote of the penal code. And what they have done is they've removed the some of the exact quote, his/her in all of those, which again, it's just ironic to me that they actually want to change the exact wording of the penal code and then they want to misquote it as part of the education code. I just think this needs to be rewritten. And the other thing I think needs to be in here is, so there's no ambiguity, under principals registration authority, and remember, this is an administrative regulation. So if there's a problem, admin is going to pull this out and say, how do we go about doing this? Up above, we read if an immigration officer or some other officer has a warrant or a court order to be there, that they're allowed to be on, the intent was that then they are allowed to be on campus. Except under the principal's registration authority, it says the principal or designee may refuse to register any visitor if he/she reasonably concludes that the individual's presence or acts would disrupt the school, students, or employees. But it doesn't say anything about a court order there. So a principal could say, well, wait a minute, I understand you have a court order, but gee, I think this is going to disrupt the students. I'm not letting you on. Dangerous territory for someone with a court order to be prevented from being on campus. So I'd like to have this one pulled also, so I can rewrite it so it's clear. And let me go back up. This is another one of my, I apologize because I do this for a living. I write regulations and city codes and stuff for a living.
FPM is outlined in that too when it returns to us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Again, going back up, if there are no exigent circumstances necessitating immediate action, in that sentence, it's referring to outsiders. And then they immediately jump to, and if the immigration officer does not possess a judicial warrant, well, you jump from one concept to another right in the middle of a sentence by using the word and. I know I'm not trying to be offensive to whoever wrote this, whether it's Gamut or CDE, but if I'm giving this a grade, I have to give this an F. I mean, really. And if an attorney wrote this, I'm really concerned. So I'd like to work with staff, and I'm happy to volunteer to rewrite this. If there are other thoughts about what you'd like to see in the final version, I'm happy to include those. But I just think this is poorly written. So those two, 5145.9 and AR 1250, I'd like to pull and not deal with those tonight and work with staff on revising them.
And before we go on, you'd like to remove the resources from 5111, remove the link, and also remove links, and also remove links from 1312.3.
I will tell you candidly, if you want to leave the links in there, I don't have real heartburn over it.
Okay.
The management resources, I do have heartburn over. I think the management resources, you keep them off the policy, and let staff hang on to those, in their own, keep them off book. They can keep more of it, but the management resources, I think, is a big deal. The links to websites.
We have one speaker to this.
I still had, this was the one that I was holding my comments on for. So I agree with a lot of what was said, and I don't like arguing with lawyers, so I'm not going to argue with Scott. But I do read it slightly differently than you do, but I agree it's poorly written. I have two problems. One is my philosophical problem of rewriting state law in board policy, which I think is just stupid, but the state makes us do it. And if I haven't said that before, I think it's stupid that we're told you have to write a policy to follow the law. Duh. We have to follow the law. My second thing is I really think it is inappropriate that we call out one type of law enforcement officer and not all law enforcement officers. Because are we saying, well, if the ATF wants to come on, we let them come on, and we don't really care what the impacts to our school are. We're only singling out one type of law enforcement. And I'll tell you, as somebody who was in law enforcement for quite a while, When the cops need to come on campus, they're going to come on campus, and it doesn't matter which badge they're carrying at that particular time. I wanted to make a lot of changes to this, and the discussion we had was all related to this federal program monitoring. So I think that Julie's request of having what specific language must be in really called out, I think is really important for us. And then secondly, just a philosophical question or comment. I can't understand why our state and federal government tells us we have this wonderful local control, and they have people like us elected to make local decisions, and they tell us that out on one side of the mouth. The other side of the mouth, they say, yeah, but you must do this and you must do it this way, and we don't care what you think. It's dumb. I would rather us just make a policy that says we'll follow state law and education code. But that's just,
So is that that's the motion? Second? Or we have a comment?
Comment or a question
Okay.
about, and
Time for questions, and then we'll
Oh.
go to the public for public comment, come back here for comments.
in our policies, there's the FPM requirements, but then when are the CDE requirements, right? And how do, I think, I don't know this, I think that we get these from CSBA and GAM. We make the, that it's based on CDE and FPM and nothing else. But how do, I don't know how to ask the question. I guess, how do we know when the there needs to be CDE policy included in this and FPM, or just one or the other?
So, and again, staff, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are instances where CDE has said, we think the gamut policy is wrong, you're going to adopt this language. And they give us the language, say, you're going to adopt this language. So it's clear in that instance. I think the FPM is, and the CDE folks are pretty clear when they, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't hide the ball. They say, look, this is the language we want to see. They tell you. And the reason why is Gamut will tell you, oh, you can modify these accordingly to meet your local conditions. But then CDE and the FPM folks will say, but not this part has to remain. Well, not that part has to remain. So they're pretty clear about what they want to see and why.
And then when does CSBA
When does what?
When does CSBA insert themselves?
Yeah, CSBA and
They never
CDE,
insert
so I'll give you an example. Our last FPM, they made us change our recently adopted suicide prevention policy because CDE felt like their policy was the model policy and they disagreed with CSBA. So there are certain policies where CDE and CSBA philosophically disagree. However, CDE has jurisdiction over them due to the funding mechanism.
I guess I'm trying to understand what's the purpose of CSBA's recommendations then?
Typically, it's based on law or ed code changes, and it's their recommendation. But it's been a small number, I would say, at least that I've experienced. I think one or two where CDE has trumped it and said you need to use ours over CSBA's.
We can have a discussion about some of the individuals within CDE that are pushing this stuff. Because some, I have my opinions on it and I won't share it here for obvious reasons, but some of the individual changes that are made, when you look at it, it's like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so, but the problem is they're the 8,000-pound gorilla. And so, come back, we'll certainly highlight, I'll make sure to have highlighted what, language that's federally mandated, language that CDE wants versus just what Gamut has. But CSBA, the California School Boards Association, they're not going to fight this stuff. This is sort of like, they do it as a resource and, we pay a little bit of money for it. And generally speaking, it's very good. This is an anomaly, I think. Yeah. Some of them are just bizarre.
One speaker card, Karen Combest.
Hi, I'm Karen Combest. I have a daughter in the district at Oakmont. I wanted to speak specifically to the hate motivated behavior policy 5145.9. We all know how important policies are for a school board, how important California Ed Code is for a school board. Recent events at Indercombe High School has shown us how critical that can be. We've seen our own board struggle with the equity policy and bounce it around from meeting to meeting, from committee to committee. They're critical. They set the policy, they set the rules. And if they're not in our best interest as a district, that's a problem. And so I would challenge that this one, the way that it's worded, is a problem. So I reached out to the CSBA directly, and they gave me the policy, and it reads like the one you have. I would challenge if the U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland, actually wrote some of the policy language that's on page 2. I actually looked for it. I couldn't find it. I actually also looked for other policies in other states, and they don't read like this. So if it was a US-based policy, wouldn't you expect that it would be in multiple states, not just California? I also spoke with Alyssa Fong, who is the local CSBA rep for this area, and she confirmed that it was a CSBA policy and that this local school board has the flexibility to change language of a policy where it fits the needs of the district. So I would challenge, and my experience is in marketing program and large-scale project implementation, and I would just read this policy and suggest that this is more of a program implementation than a policy document in some areas, not on the penal codes, not on defining hate behavior, but certainly on talking about what the district is going to provide. And as a parent of a student and as a teacher, I would be very concerned with some of these things, including the development of social emotional learning for my student, explaining the harms and dangers of explicit and implicit biases for my student. So you're responsible for that now. You're going to manage them. You're going to manage my students' biases. You're going to change them. How so? It talks about the training for the staff, promoting an understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've already said that we don't have a definition of equity yet, so we need that. They actually say that the rules prohibiting hate-motivated behavior will be provided. Shouldn't they be provided in the policy? I mean, this is, from my perspective, pretty straightforward. If it's a rule, it should be in a policy. If it's a program or a project plan, it should be elsewhere. Has no business in a policy. And I think if you have it read like this, it's going to open up lots of liability that I personally wouldn't want for the district, whether I was a student, parent, or teacher. Thank you.
Right. Do we have a motion? Nope, no longer. You got to fill out a card for each agenda item. As I said it before, it's not open. We're shut down now. Thank you. All right, do we have a motion? Scott, do we have a motion?
Yeah, I'll move approval of the item with the amendments to delete management resources from BP 5111 and pulling AR 1250 and board policy 5145.9, hate motivated behavior. We're pulling that one, and AR 1250, visitors and outsiders.
Leave links alone at this point?
I'm fine with that.
We have a second.
I'll second.
All right, a motion by Mr. Huber, a second by Ms. Hirota. Is there a comment, Mr. Constant?
I guess I'm still not understanding why we're taking resources off. My
Management
personal
resources?
opinion is the more resources we provide the public to understand what we're doing, the better. And I know when I'm looking at things, sometimes it's easier if you have something help guide you where you're going. So I'm in favor of everything else but that. So I just got a little heartburn on that.
Pete, let me tell you why. So if you pull up board policy 5111, the one that's online, right, the one that's in the packet, you look under management resources. The first document is a document that is drafted by the Attorney General's office that is largely an amalgamation of state law mixed in with some Attorney General policy, I will say. It's 55 pages long. It was done in 2018. As soon as they change that, right? By including that in our policy at the end under management resources, if that changes, then we have to come back and update this policy again. That's my opinion. Let me give you another one, the very thing below it. Court decision, Plyler versus Doe from 1982. That's not controlling law anymore. There have been cases after that that are actually the controlling law. So that case, when you look at it, and when you go into Westlaw or LexisNexis, you know, for where attorneys go look at cases, there's a big yellow flag right next to Plyler versus Doe. And when you click on it, it'll tell you all the cases after it that have interpreted Plyler that go beyond what Plyler says. So Plyler, while it stands for a basic proposition, it's actually not controlling law anymore. And so I think the management resources, you know, to me, you know, you look at I'm scrolling down. Here's another one. U.S. Department of Justice and the Department of Civil Rights and Joint Publication drafted May 8, 2014. Well, I can't imagine that they haven't updated that since 2014. Civil rights, there's been a ton of civil rights cases since 2014. They're just,
The counter to that is, if these are the publications that led to developing this policy, they're relevant. So I guess we'll just agree to disagree because I disagree.
that's okay. What I like about you, Pete, though, is you disagree without being disagreeable.
Because I'm lovable.
I know.
Management resources is struck out here, page three,
yeah,
right? This is the new one,
No,
right?
that's
Or
not-
just the old one?
It's missing stuff on. My motion was to say we strike out the management resources, leave the websites, but strike out the management resources.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay.
I'm gonna keep.
All right, Barbara, will you take the roll?
Yes, Pete Constant,
No.
Heidi Hall, Julie Hirota. Yes. Scott Huber,
Yes.
and Andrew Tag.
Yes, motion passes. Move on to item 6.1, which is trustee voting area draft maps criteria. With Joe Landon presenting.
Thank you. The purpose of this item is to discuss the criteria for developing the by trustee area maps. If you look in the board packet, we have listed the legal requirements as well as the traditional criteria. And then we tried to incorporate some of the additional board criteria that we've heard at the prior public board meetings. But this is an opportunity that the board requested to be able to discuss and take any potential action and give direction to our demographer on any other criteria, or if we incorporated anything incorrectly that you want to give us further guidance on. So with that,
All right, I will open up there is no public comment, so bring it back to the board. Comments, Pete?
I'm not going to repeat all my comments from the previous meeting, but I do have a rather long motion that I'd like to make after we've had discussion. I printed it out so you guys don't have to try and remember what I say. So when appropriate, I'll make a long motion.
Seeing none, go ahead, Pete.
Wait a minute, I have a comment. I don't agree with the traditional criteria because what we learned in our last meeting is that there was this MAPS. I can't remember what it's called now, but MAPS Act not required for school districts. So I don't want to add that as the criteria if it's not required. It may be considered, but I don't think traditional criteria should even be in there. I don't want to pursue the direction with that as the assumed criteria.
So you want to take out the, everything
Well,
under
I think it
tradition-
affects contiguous mostly. I think that's what it affects mostly in the traditional criteria. In my opinion, which is, that is all it is that perhaps each area shall represent, it says 2 or more comprehensive schools. What if it represented all? If we're required to use the MAPS Act as criteria.
Fair comment.
Ready to make a motion?
Make a motion, Pete.
You could pass those down. I'd make a motion to direct the demographer to utilize the following criteria in waterfall fashion to guide the development of 5 trustee areas within the Roseville Joint Union High School District. A, do not identify, reference, or take into account current board trustee residents. B, do not align trustee areas with school attendance boundaries. Ensure that there are at a minimum 2 attendance areas within each trustee area. C, ensure trustee areas are geographically contiguous. D, ensure trustee areas are compact. E, within permissible population differences, account for future population growth. F, to the greatest extent possible, do not divide neighborhoods and communities of interest as defined in the California Elections Code. However, school attendance areas are not to be considered as communities of interest. G, to the greatest extent possible, ensure trustee areas have easily identifiable boundaries. In section 2, prior to the drawing of any trustee area boundaries, develop clearly defined process for how to select which trustee areas will be in which election cycle. And then that's the full motion. And then underneath is the California Election Code definition of community of interest.
Okay, is there a second for that?
I'd actually like to hear Julie's alternate motion.
Well, there's no, you need to have a second for,
No, she can have an alternate motion. Why not? But she
Well,
can
my
make an
alternate motion would be all of that, because I don't want to say it again, less C, item C.
You said less item C?
Which is ensure trustee areas are geographically contiguous.
Can I ask a question? What does that mean under the MAPS Act, or what is geographically, I mean, I know what it means to a layperson, but what does it mean under the MAPS Act? And I will freely admit, I've dealt with this stuff a lot, and I've never had to get into this kind of granular detail. Thank heavens.
Since it's part of the motion, I can explain what it means in context of the motion. And the simple explanation would be not like the Oakmont attendance boundaries. In other words, you do not have to leave the district to re-enter the district, or you do not have to leave the trustee area to enter the trustee area. The entire district will be contained within one boundary. Well, will be contained within one boundary. You should be able to take a trustee area and start at one point and draw around it until it ends. It would not, by contrast, have one area here or one area here. That's not contiguous. This is contiguous. Everything.
We should include it in our motion, according to our.
I do think, though, that by case law, it is required. And I believe there is, and we can have him come up and clarify, I believe there is case law under the California Voting Rights Act that relates to that.
I'm a little bit more concerned about compact, because when you have these other items out there, like a minimum of two school attendance boundaries, you're not going to get compact areas. I think you're going to get, in some instances, long, constrained, and twisting boundaries. And I'm just my thought. I mean, I don't mind this little. I wouldn't mind saying as compact as possible, or as compact as practicable.
I would be willing as part of the motion to add the modifier to the greatest extent possible language as is contained in F and G to item number D, but I would not entertain at all any trustee areas that are not contiguous.
Just make one quick comment that our attorney had said last week, and I just had it written down too, that if it's not contiguous, then it potentially opens the district map up to a potential challenge. That's potentially doesn't, but it potentially could be challenged.
That doesn't mean it will be the map that's adopted. It'll be a map that's presented, or a plan that's presented, not necessarily one that's adopted. And I mean, all things considered, it may not make reasonable sense when it is presented, but it's an option for our community to explore based on having greatest representation for all the schools.
Just clearly say, I will not support, and obviously I'm only one vote, but I will not support anything that moves forward without contiguous boundaries. I think if you look throughout the state, I will challenge you to find, I don't know of one representative district, whether it be at school district, county, state level, that is not contiguous. That is a basic fundamental of drawing districts and drawing jurisdictions. I think, I know this is just my opinion, but I think we would 100% be open to a lawsuit, and we would have trouble with the basic California Voting Rights Act because of the non-contiguous area.
It's just an option out there, a map for the public to weigh in. I would also like them to just, for interest, take into effect the respect for the voters' wish and continuity in office. And have them, it's a map. So what does that look like? We all know it's not, it won't look pretty for sure, but it's not necessarily the one that's being chosen. It's just a map.
Well, there's no voter intent to ensure because voters have never voted by district before. So that's a spurious argument.
I'm not sure it is.
But if you have somebody who can't run, who's an existing board member who can no longer run because they're in a district that's already occupied somebody who's got a longer term than it is, it's throwing that person out of office.
What if we just went as the minimum of the federal law, Equal Population Federal Voting Rights Act, and no racial gerrymandering, and see what is proposed?
I don't think we have the time to do this twice.
I don't think we should take any shortcuts.
We just say following best practices in district drawing is not taking any shortcuts. I mean, there's clear history and case law, and I mean, we've seen where legislation has put congressional districts, state legislative districts, counties, cities. We know that it is lawsuits and case law that has led to that.
Heidi, I'd like to hear what you think.
I want to get a little bit of clarification on what you mean by compact. Do you mean compact as in like close together, or as many people as possible, or define D a little bit more?
When you look at large geographic areas like ours, and you look at communities of interest, and you look at compactness, you could take and draw, as Scott indicated, like horizontal bands throughout the district. You would no longer have compactness, but you would also destroy communities of interest. And, you know, a fundamental principle in representative government, particularly when you have districts, is that people can identify their area. And by having them contiguous and compact, that is, the average person can look at a map and say, I live in this part of town. This is who my representative is. And when you start to get non-compact, like when they had a Senate district that started in San Luis Obispo and ended in San Jose, that's not compact. People had no relationship to each other.
I think the only public comment we've had is a person who was very concerned that we'll go to these districts and represent our rural areas. So by not making it contiguous, we represent larger area within the district, cover more school, more ground, potentially.
And I say it's only an option. It's not necessarily the
map that-
selected
yeah.
map. It's an option for consideration based on greatest representation. Greatest representation.
And I would like to see a respect for the voters' wishes and continuity in office, just, again, a map. See what that looks like.
Here's my thought on some of this stuff. In my day job, I have done this. I think this will be number 5, although I'm not working as an attorney on this one. I've done it in 4 other situations. I've never seen it done like this before. Not that this isn't a good way to do it. I've never seen. Usually, it's let the demographer do their job, and if we have an issue with it, then we go back and draw some more maps for us that look at this, that, or the other. I think they know federal law. I think they're the experts. They understand equal population. I think I think they know that we care about having multiple schools, each trustee being part of multiple schools, boundaries. Of course, boundaries are going to change at some point too, so there may be an issue down the road there, but so there should be as much as possible, not just, take a sliver of a school boundary, but I think we let them do their job, and then they can bring us some maps, and if we don't like it, we can modify it. I don't know.
That direct the demographer to utilize the federal law as criteria to guide the development of the trustee districts within RJUHSD.
And just to be clear, the federal law,
Equal Population Federal Voting Rights Act and no racial gerrymandering.
those 3 items,
Required, right? Those are required.
and no other direction.
That's my motion.
That's your motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. Got a motion by Mr. Rhoda, second by Mr. Huber. Barbara, will you take the roll?
Wait, we get to comment on the motion, right? So I just want to say that I think this is wrong. I think we have to ignore what we have learned from literally decades of doing this and seeing a number of not only best practices from outside government, but a number of laws that have been passed, particularly over the last decade, to guide the development of maps. To ignore those, I think, is wrong. And I think that we owe it to the community to specifically look at communities of interest and contiguous. Those are like the basic tenets of map drawing for districts, and to not include those, I think, is flat out wrong.
I think part of what's challenging is that we've had so little feedback thus far, like, meaning, no offense to anyone, but we've had other really big topics. And I feel like this topic has been appreciated for how important it is, because we've had other things. And so our feedback that we've gotten from the community have just been really limited so far. So I feel like that's challenging us a little bit, because I have a hard time even knowing, other than the one speaker that we did have on it, no one else has given any input on it. So I hate to put up big box around what we're asking the demographer to do, but I do agree with a lot of this direction. So
Let me maybe try and soothe some of that. In all of the maps I've looked at for the 4 public agencies where I was serving as an attorney, I've never seen a single map that wasn't geographically contiguous. I just haven't seen it. And I think the professionals will do their job. I think they're gonna do it well. And they're gonna make it so that, you know, they're gonna make it as, how do I put it? As legally defensible as they can. Ultimately, again, understand, they don't have a dog in the hunt here. They don't care what the maps look like. The demographers don't live anywhere near our district. So they don't care. What they care about is they care about making sure that they give us something that is legally justifiable. That we're not going to flip around and say, hey, wait a minute, you gave us something we got sued on. Ultimately, the 5 of us have to look at the voters and say, this is the map we chose and these are the reasons why. And I think tying the hands of the demographers at this point, while I agree with Pete, I got to tell you, I agree with a lot of the stuff on your list. Maybe all of it. Maybe. Anyway, I do. But I already seconded Julie's. I think we just, look, let's get the process going. Let's get some maps in front of us. Let's open it up for the public to submit maps. And then, you know, let's hope that we get 20 or 30 that we can look at and pull from and say, hey, I like this, I like that. Maybe we, you know, and maybe we don't, maybe we come up with our own that will be different than what everybody else proposed. But let's, you know, I'll be honest with you. I really miss talking about curriculum. I miss talking about curriculum. And I'd really like to get, you know.
We leave it to our demographer with the federal law as the requirement, that leaves a lot of opportunity for him to do his job as best as he knows it based on practice. And doesn't tie his hands and allows, you know, doesn't force this into a box by adding all the additional criteria. That may not be what I see back, but it's also leaving it to an expert to make those recommendations as the first.
Final comment will just be that I think hoping for legally defensible maps is the only criteria, is a very low bar, and I think we owe it to our constituents to do more. So once again, I just agree to disagree, and we'll move on.
Mr. Rhoda, second by Mr. Huber. Barbara, will you take, is this a resolution or just?
No, it's not.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
No.
Heidi? Aye, okay. Motion carries 4-1. Thank you all. Item 6.2 is,
When will we go live with the public ability to do some mapping and stuff? Or is that after the initial presentation of maps?
Together on the website. So we're still, I believe it would have been late October.
Yeah, you came all the way here. Why don't you talk?
Yes.
oh, I honestly didn't know you were here.
I didn't want to say
Good to see
anything, and I value the discussion. It was very, very, very enlightening. The mapping tools that you have ordered will be available 2 to 3 weeks from now. The data came out Tuesday morning, and we've been finding a lot of problems with the data, so we're trying to fix that and put it together, and then our December 15th clients are our first priority. Those are counties. And then our other clients will cycle in. So I would say 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks from now, we'll have your tools ready for you. Thank you.
I would love to hear from our community when they're published and when they're made available. I'd love to hear from our community.
Our intent would be to provide your tools, and that they They have feedback structures within that that simply send, if they draw a map, they just send it to us and it'll be processed and then published on that webpage. Same with a paper map. We'll have to publish those.
Thank you. Item 6.2, public hearing and adoption of resolution number 2119 of assurance of fiscal year 21-22 instructional materials. Ed Services, Dr. Moore.
Yes, thank you. So this is our annual resolution that is required to be done before the end of the 8th week of school. So we are in plenty of time for that. And it simply confirms that we have sufficient materials and that when we adopted them, we followed the protocols and that they are standards aligned. And it's in the specific categories that are listed. So in the specific core instructional areas, those are the materials in particular. We're not showing all the electives and all the possible courses that we offer, although we do provide those materials as well. And this is specifically to meet the education code, and staff has diligently ordered materials, made sure we have them for our students, and confirmed with the sites that we have sufficient numbers of them.
Questions? Seeing none, open up to the public. One speaker card, Karen Thomas.
Hi, this is Karen Combest, parent with a daughter at Oakmont. This is the last time I'm going to talk tonight, so I think everyone should be happy, right? So I was going to call out that the ethnic studies course wasn't on here, but what you've just confirmed for me is this is not an exhaustive list of courses. So I guess one of my questions or areas of feedback would be, where is the exhaustive list of courses with their books and even perhaps their supplemental material, because that is actually identified in the California code, that's outlined here. I think it specifically says textbooks, instructional materials, and supplemental instructional materials, which calls to the attention that the health class didn't include the supplemental material Global Citizens, Roseville Joint Union High School District. So I think that's a prime example of where that needs to maybe be rectified. My daughter has great teachers, Ms. Carroll, Ms. Durkee, Mr. Buetti, Mr. Moss. If my daughter could have Mr. Moss every semester for the rest of her time here, I'd be a happy mom. And I look at their material, I see what's out there, but I'm sometimes curious about the classes she should take next year or what's coming down this semester. And all I can see in Google Classroom is what's happening like right now and what she's done. I would love to have access to the materials for some of these classes and to be able to go look at that. And I think that would be full transparency in the district. Wouldn't that be amazing that you could see all of the materials that your student was being offered, and then you could also investigate future classes. So if I could put in a request to have some opportunity to have some resource online. Everything's digital, right? Everything's available. Why can't we get access to that great stuff that you guys are doing in the classrooms, whether it's the textbook, the supplemental materials, the assignments, the videos that our kids are watching, the articles they're reading? That would be amazing. So thank you.
Mike Wixon.
Thank you. Mike Wixon, and I just wanted, I had sent an email, I just wanted to be sure you got that email. I wanted to extend the terms that I believe to be epithets that are white privilege, whiteness, and then also white space. So I am really concerned about these kinds of epithets being in materials that the district provides to the students. I think it's a violation of civil rights. I think it has some serious concerns, and I don't think that the district should be in the business of educating kids that way. It is it's basically like race essentialism or gender essentialism, or it boils your identity down to a single thing. And it's horrible. It's awful. I think it's sad that it's come to this kind of thing. So what I'm asking basically is that you guys go back and do a phrase search, a word search, whatever you want to phrase it or term it, and look for these terms, and then also anything that would have to do with implicit biases where it's an accusation based upon a certain race having an implicit bias. I don't believe the district's done a search of the documents that they have and offer. So I would just ask that you guys do that. I think that's enough. If you find those, if you're willing to do that and you want to go back and do that, I would ask that those then be brought forward so that I think it would be good for the public and for you guys to see how extensive these terms are being used in the materials that the kids are getting. So thank you.
Thank you. Good. Board members, any comments? We have a motion?
Question, and I apologize, Dr. Moore, if you already answered this, but with the health curriculum that we just learned about today, that is not part of this.
Item that has been brought up in public comment was a supplemental digital literacy curriculum that is not part of the adopted health curriculum. And so you're correct that that would not be a part of this.
Oh, I guess separate from this. How do we, as a district, know what those supplemental items are? Who knows that?
Great question. We're doing a formal audit of our curriculum, and we are striving for that transparency. It will take a little bit of time because even the core and primary pieces haven't been all in the same place. So we're starting with what do we have adopted, and let's make that available. Now, when I say make that available, I'm referring to the board outlines and the board adopted curricular outlines. The textbooks themselves have copyright permissions and licensing. And so by our policy, we continue to make those available for review by appointment at the district office. And we're happy to share those at any time. But because of copyright information, we can't just make that publicly accessible on the website. We pay for each book and we pay for each license. So we're doing that audit, and then part of that conversation more recently has come up as around that supplemental, and we're working on a better and more clear process for that. So we have had a variety of processes, and we're trying to streamline that, make it more transparent, and make sure we're including all the steps so we don't miss anything moving forward.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Huber, a second by Constant. Barbara, will you take the roll?
Yes, Pete Constant? Heidi Hall? Julie Hirota? Yes. Scott Huber?
Yes.
And Andrew Tag?
Passes 5-0. Item 6.3 is CSBA nomination for Director at Large, African American, American Indian, county level. Just for context, CSBA is made up of 24 regional directors and 5 at-large directors. One is from a county office, one is African American board member, one is Hispanic board member, one is American Indian Native American board member, and one is Asian American Pacific Islander board member. They all have to be board members on a school board. So there's an opening for, as I just said, African American, American Indian, and a county board member to CSBA. So if anybody has a nominee, I hadn't heard from anybody here for nominations, so there's nothing to do on this item. We just move, okay? Pending agenda item 7.1, lots more. Anybody request for pending agenda? Pete?
We've heard a couple of times about the FAIR curriculum, and we're having the discussions on equity and ethnic studies and all that. I would like to learn more about that, so I would like to have a board presentation on the FAIR curriculum as it stands, and then I would like to see sort of a table of differences between that curriculum and the curriculum that we are following.
We'd ask Dr. Moore to work on that for a future board meeting. Any other pending agenda items?
Need to move. I wanted to circle back to Mr. Manfredi's question about the saliva tests. Two of the school nurses had reached out requesting the same. And I wasn't aware, I guess, that we could just decide that and make that an option. So is it as easy as us just making that an option? Or is that something that would have to go to a vote or?
Talking about it countywide as well as here, we had conversations today, so there's logistics involved with it, but Mr. Hasty can help you.
We're having conversations with National Labs, who does our current testing in our district. They do offer a saliva test. In conversations with them, and I apologize for the way that this is going to come out, and so I'll just be blunt about it. The problem with the saliva test, according to our reps, a couple of pieces, is the inaccuracy that happens through the saliva test for a number of reasons. Let's say you happen to go and have a double-double and then decide to come and do a saliva test. What tends to happen is they tend to see repetitive issues with the tests not being accurate and having to ask people to come back to take multiple spit tests. You also have to be able to provide enough spit in order to do that. I can't believe that I'm sitting here talking about spit, but anyway, it is something that our representative is looking into. They think they might be able to offer it once a week. However, there's a large cost to the company for doing that, because they actually have to do a special run for the saliva test versus the swabs that they have. And the number of folks that they have found that continue to want to use the saliva test, according to our rep, drastically decreases over time because of the fact that they have to come back and continue to repeat. And at some point, they just go, okay, I'm going to take the nasal swab. The nasal swab that we're doing with National Labs is not the one that goes all the way up into your brain. It's a lower nasal swab. So it is the lower portion of the nasal. So yeah, things I never thought I would becoming, fairly knowledgeable about. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we are working and looking into that option for our folks. And our staff always have the ability to go test elsewhere. We're accepting, our plan is to accept tests as long as it's not a home test. Our plan is to accept that. So if they want to go to a local pharmacy, they want to go to some other place that provides that and bring that test in, that's something that we're accepting as well.
With the saliva tests, that they're coming back as inconclusive, or they're coming back as false positives, or?
Combination of both is what our rep has told us.
Dr. Oldham, that it's not up to the place it needs to be. They can be used, but you do have a lot of misfires on that, so they have to keep bringing people in.
Anything else I can try and answer for you?
I'd like to get an update, either within our next two meetings, a learning loss update and the progress that's been made on the universal assessment. I think that's what you were calling it, some kind of universal assessment, and what that timeline looks like. That's my only request within the next two meetings.
That as well.
So I believe we have scheduled every month to do the learning loss update per your previous request. So we are on schedule for that next time.
Doesn't sound like it. Our next regularly scheduled meetings for October, we'll have 3 weeks off between our next meeting. There's a fifth Thursday, so we'll meet on October 14th and the 28th next month, 7 o'clock back here at Wood Creek. And then just for reference, we only have one meeting in November on November 18th, which is the third Thursday, and then one meeting in December, which is again the third Thursday, December 16th. So those are our last 4 meetings of the year. The end is in sight, right? And we'll be having a special board meeting at some point here in the near future, in this month of October. So with that, board and staff comments? Joe? Brad? April? Heidi?
Not too much. I get to visit with Dr. Moore the next 2 weeks to visit some campuses. So I'll be seeing some of you, and then hopefully we'll set up some more now that kids are back in school. And that's about it. I have a happy freshman who loves him some high school. So I don't know what's going on over there, if it's a girl, if it's the food or what, but he loves high school. So I'm excited to come and check it out.
I know, but I already talked enough. I got nothing left.
I want to thank Dr. Moore and all of those that are working on all of this, that we're asking about curriculum. Because I think the underlying thing is that us as board members, we're getting asked to make decisions on very controversial issues, and that we have either no knowledge about or very little knowledge about. And those are items that are creating anger and deep division in our community. And so as a board member, I think it's really irresponsible for us to try to address those without knowing more. So I'm greatly appreciative of Dr. Moore and her team for starting to look into these issues and spending time on them. I don't think this is going to be quick. I know everybody wants these answers really fast. But I also think we need to make responsible decisions with a lot of information. And I think that information comes from our students as well, our students' perceptions and our student response. Because I don't want to make decisions for adults. I want to make decisions for students. And so I appreciate the work that's being done so far. I look forward to seeing more of this, and appreciate the time that you and your team are spending on it, because I know it's a huge undertaking, and it's kind of it's turning out to be like class by class, right? There's a lot of great ideas that keep coming out about transparency, and I know you're taking all of that into consideration. So thank you for that.
I've got a couple of things I wanted to mention. One, a little bit more mundane, but the governor signed AB 361, which allows public agencies to continue to do meetings by Zoom. It is fairly onerous, and quite frankly, it's only in situations where public agency passes a resolution saying that they can't meet without being a dangerous situation. And I hope we don't do it. I hope we go back to remaining like we're doing it now, where the public can come and talk to us. I think that's a much better way to go. I have started my sort of meetings with principals, site by site, and I decided to start at one end and work to the other. And I had a great meeting with Amber Clark over at Granite Bay High School, or Clarkie, right? She's building a great, I think, a great rapport with the teachers. She actually she had a friendly wager with one of the teachers who was a let's see, I hate to bring up a sore subject, but since it was my Cougars that won, I'll go ahead and do that. One of her teachers, who's an alumni of BYU football, was playing ASU last weekend. BYU started out the week as a 7-point underdog, ended the week as a 3-point underdog, and BYU won. So there's a lovely picture of her in gorgeous BYU royal blue, wearing a jersey. And so a shout out to Jason Sitterud for throwing down that wager, and Principal Clark. Keep it up. That's wonderful. I had a wonderful chat. Been to a couple of football games. Was here for a football game at Wood Creek. And generally speaking, I got to tell you, the students are really well behaved. There's great school spirit. the staff and the administration and principals are like, you know, I mean, it was wonderful. It was wonderful to see them here. In fact, I got to meet some of the spouses of I don't know, 4 or 5 of administrative people here, and it was, again, fantastic. I do want to mention one thing that I have heard. My son was telling me that there's this viral TikTok craze going on called devious licks. I know it was so last week, and I am a little bit that last week kind of guy, but I have to tell you, in a way, but at West Park, they flipped the script a little bit. Because for those of you who don't know, devious licks, it was kids would go into the bathroom, pull a soap dispenser off the wall and steal it and take it home. Or it was an effort to see who could one up each other, right? Well, apparently someone flipped it around and started doing and I just texted my son the one time that he doesn't text right back immediately. It's called Angel Something, where they, what is it? Angelic yield. So it's sort of the reverse of that, right? You know, what can you do that's nice to someone else, or, you know, to brighten someone else's day, and who can one up each other? And I'm proud of students in our district who thought, let's not do this stupid stuff. Let's flip it around and do something positive. And so I have to applaud the students, because yet again, the students have shown us the right way to act. And so I want to applaud them for that. And so principals, if you hear these angelic yield, applaud it wherever you can. Thanks for telling me what that's all about.
Thank you, Scott. Good report. Appreciate it.
Just real quick, I just want to congratulate Wood Creek and Roseville for an outstanding Junction Bowl last Friday. It was sold out, capacity crowd, dance teams, band, awesome cheer sections. It was a great event. And again, for a Friday night to sit there and see that for a couple hours, you start to forget this whole COVID craziness, and just to see that normal piece was really cool. The other thing is tomorrow is the Bill Santucci Memorial Golf Tournament, which raises about, they give away about $25,000 in scholarships to seniors every year. So one of the tournament's hosts, President Andrew Tagg, he's been a part of that, along with Aldo Panesci, Carol Garcia, Ryan Ronco, Kurt Euler, and a host of others. But that is all day tomorrow. So that's where you'll see most of us, raising money for our graduating seniors, giving them scholarship funds, and we are really excited about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. That'll be a great event tomorrow, and thanks for those people coming out and donating time and raffles and all that good stuff. I just wanted a couple things commented. I joined the CSBA calls every once a month, and yesterday it was kind of interesting. The call was about governance during crisis, and I said, where were you a year and a half? You know, I'm just getting this information, you know. So by the time my presidency ends, I'll be perfect at running a meeting. No, I did get to do a fun thing, and I had to say, you know, we try to get back to some fun things, and I was at Oakmont High School, of all places. Our friends at Oakmont, watching a girls' volleyball match. And it was a little awkward. I didn't wear my name tag because I was actually there. They were playing Nevada Union, and my niece plays for Nevada Union. So I didn't wear a name tag. I thought that'd be in bad form to be rooting for Nevada Union. But I was rooting for her. But it was fun to see the girls playing, a good crowd in hand. They also had water polo going on at the same time. So it was a lot of activity going on at Oakmont. And it was just fun to see, you know, all this, the athletics going on, the kids having a good time, just you know, back to the business of school. But these are, I want to finally kind of piggyback on what Julie said. These are heady times. These discussions over race, ethnic studies, critical race theories. I'm learning about them as we go along. There's a lot to know about it, and I appreciate Dr. Moore and the work she's doing in coming in not only from an outside perspective in her role, but in Ed Services, taking the lead here. I enjoyed going to one ethnic studies course. I plan to go to some more just to see from my own eyes and keep an open mind and an open perspective. And again, without knowing firsthand and without getting the information and the materials and learning, which I'm doing a lot of. Don't forget, we've been stuck in COVID for a year and a half, so we knew this was coming, but it definitely, as you said, it's irresponsible for us just to put ourselves out in certain comments without knowing all the facts. I totally agree, and that's the way I sort of operate and try to get as much information as I can, and I appreciate that, as well as yours, guidance, John, and all this, and it's not an easy time, so. But with that, I know we probably dragged it on with our comments. Scott gets the prize today, but it was a great report. I love hearing all the stuff you're doing, Scott, and appreciate that. And we'll adjourn at 9:09. See you in 3 weeks.